So if there is one issue that I get beaten up over more than any other, it is my approach to big tech and my feeling that big tech needs to be stopped from censoring our ideas and from threatening our free speech. And the libertarians especially climb down my throat whenever I say anything about this because they are supposedly independent actors, not government actors. And for some reason, independent actors are allowed to take away the rights with which our Creator endowed us. Blake Masters, who is currently running for Senate in Arizona, wrote a terrific piece about this in the Wall Street Journal. Blake Masters is the president of the Thiel Foundation to promote science and innovation. He is the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, the co-author with Peter Thiel of 0 to 1 Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future. Blake, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here with you.
So I just want to read a little bit of your op-ed in the Journal. It's called Reclaiming Our Independence from Big Tech, and the subhead was Companies that Censor Political Speech, Harm Competition, and Ruin Our Brains Need Regulation. The first paragraph is, Google can swing an election, Facebook knows more about you than your spouse does, Amazon's Alexa can record your living room conversations, yet for all the talk about the big tech threat, these companies keep getting bigger, more powerful, and more abusive. Can you describe these abuses in a little more detail?
Sure. Yeah, I think conservatives rightly focus on censorship, right? But and it's obvious that's a problem. I don't think Facebook or Twitter should be allowed to say, kick off a sitting United States president while he's in office, and they do that obviously because they don't like Donald Trump's politics. Meanwhile, you've got Taliban commanders, with verified accounts on Twitter. So the political censorship is a real problem. I think we should treat these companies more like the phone company, common carriers, right? Can't discriminate against users based on the content of their speech. But I also just think censorship is one of the kind of harms from big tech. I also worry a lot about just their sheer bigness and their ability to squash competitors. Google buys one company every week, and they've been doing that for about a dozen years, not because they care about that new technology that they're acquiring, but they just care that technology can't get so big that it competes with Google someday. So they buy these companies to squash them. I think that's bad for the market. I think that's bad for competition. And then I also worry about something like addictiveness, right? These products are intentionally engineered to addict people to them, especially children. Just a study last week came out that showed how bad Instagram is for the mental health of teenagers, particularly teenage women. And so I think, just like cigarettes or gambling, we should recognize sort of unlimited social media use can actually be intentionally addictive. Maybe we should do something about that.
So I want to get back to the addictive thing, because that's an argument I hadn't actually heard before, even though obviously it's true. But whenever I talk about this, and I think it's urgently important. I mean, the censorship thing especially drives me crazy because I think free speech is essential. But the attacks, there are several attacks. Let me give them to you in order. We'll talk about them one at a time. One is, well, there's no God-given right to have a Twitter account. This is a company that you can build your own Twitter. Why should you have a right to be on Twitter? That's absurd. God didn't create you and endow you with the right to be on Twitter. And these guys have their free speech rights because they are not government actors, and you're essentially declaring what they have to allow on their platform. What's the answer to that?
Well, we do that for the phone company. All I'm saying is maybe at a certain point, Facebook and Twitter look more like the phone company than your local bakery or something like that, right? And, you hear a lot, go build your own Google, go build your own Twitter. Well, it's like some people tried to build their own conservative social networking site with Parler, right? And you saw AWS and you saw Amazon ripped Parler off, right? They denied Parler the critical infrastructure you needed to exist. And you can't just go build your own internet, go build your own Google. Well, that's naive. You can't actually do it. It misunderstands what Google is. Google has a monopoly on search because of its first mover advantage and because of its massive network effects. So you can't go build your own. And at a certain point, these companies, they get so big that they're bigger and more powerful than many governments around the world. And I think when that happens, conservatives and people who actually care about the free market can say, no, these companies are so big, they're actually throwing this market out of whack. There is no free market here. and you may have to regulate them differently than a local small business.
One of the things where I do believe there's a gray area here, and it does disturb me, but when I saw, for instance, Amazon knock, was it Ryan Anderson? Is that the author I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
He had a book about transgenderism, When Harry Becomes Sally. Now, listen, I love Amazon. They bring books to my house. Anybody who brings books to my house is welcome. It's a great system. All that Bezos had to do to get me to build a statue to him was not become a censorious tyrant. And yet, when he knocks a book off, that means not only is that book harder to get, but it means publishers will not. He's selling something like 90% of new books in America.
And it sends a message. Like, Ryan Anderson is a serious person. He's a serious academic. That book is a serious book. It is not some hate-filled invective or some screed. It's a real book. And so that sends a message to every young and enterprising thinker. Like, no, stay within the lines. If you ever want to have a commercially successful book, if you ever want to have a good career, stay within the lines. Don't try to move or change the Overton window. That really stifles speech. I mean, it just does. I think it's a huge problem.
So what do you do with a guy like Bezos with Amazon? How do you regulate that? You can't call that's not the phone company. That's an actual store of some sort.
Yeah, I think you take a look at Amazon's market sales. I bet they have a pretty big monopoly on sort of online book sales. And past a certain point, I think you can say you're a platform and you have to be facially neutral with respect to your content. Like, you don't get to kick all conservative books off. And if you want to be a smaller niche liberal bookstore, you can do that. But that's not what Amazon.com is. And so I think what people need to reacquaint themselves with here is a sense of scale. Like, when Amazon becomes more dominant than any other company in the whole world, again, you can treat it differently than your local bookstore. Otherwise, you're just going to bury your head in the sand and get crushed by your political opposition. Amazon doesn't share our values. And so if we don't make sure that they play by, I think, commonsensical notions of fair play, they'll just crush us. You won't be able to buy conservative books in 5 years.
It's so dated to me. It seems to me that what their argument is the First Amendment only stops the government from censoring us. And that's true, but it stops us from censoring us because we have a God-given right to free speech. And the government is instituted among men to preserve those rights. So if the threat comes from a private entity, I don't see why that shouldn't be resisted.
I agree with you. And I'd also point out, at a certain point, these companies are so big that they are inextricably linked with the government in all sorts of ways. And so in only a nominal sense is Facebook truly a private company. The White House and Jen Psaki, they send communications bulletins to Facebook saying, that's COVID misinformation. You have to rip that piece of information off your platform. And, the ellipsis is, or else we'll come at you and, make life hell. And so Facebook, of course, complies. And you see this fusion of the state and extreme concentration of corporate power. And I think that should scare all of us. At a certain point, these companies are so big, they're not even private.
Another argument that I get a lot of is that this is an attack on capitalism. And unlike Joe Biden, I actually am a capitalist. I believe it's a wonderful system. But all systems, all human relationships are regulated. There's, you and I can have a conversation, but if you start to strangle me, the police come in. There are certain limits to every human interaction. But you write in your piece, Amazon controls more than half of all online retail sales in America. Google is 92% of search. Apple's annual profit is larger than the gross domestic product of 7 U.S. states. Why is that bad?
I think it's bad because at a certain point, this market dominance, it keeps other competitors out. Like I said, Google buys people just to shut them down. I think a healthy version of capitalism is one in America where you have 60 or 70 million capitalists, right? But not just 6 or 7. And so if you just get big tech and you let these handful of multinational corporations control the flow of information in our society, again, especially at the direction of a left-wing White House, I think this is really bad. I think it's just clear. Like, Barry Goldwater understood this, right? He said that the enemy of freedom is unrestrained power. And conservatives are good at understanding this when it's power in governmental hands, right? We don't want an unlimited, arbitrarily powerful government. But Barry Goldwater also went further and he said, this is true whether it's government or in a corporate concentration of power. And we know that Facebook, we know that Google, we know that these super powerful big tech companies we know that they're very eager to quash our individual liberties. They just are. And so the question is, are we going to get serious about that threat? Or are we just going to plug our ears and say, no, it's a private company. Anything they do to us is fine.
Yeah.
I just think that's naive.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe, and you will get more terrific content like this.